Welcome to Club Book with New York Times best-selling author Jasmine Guillory. My name is Emma Nadler, and I am a psychotherapist, author, and speaker. My memoir, The Unlikely Village of Eden, is about learning to adapt when life doesn't go to plan, redefining community, and creating your own imperfect path. I've also written for the Washington Post, Salon, Huffington Post, and Newsweek, among others. Before I fully introduce tonight's guest, I want to tell you more about the series that is bringing her to us. Club Book is a program of MELSA, the Metropolitan Library Service Agency, made possible through Minnesota's Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, and coordinated by Library Strategies, part of the Friends of St. Paul Public Library. Carver County Library is the co-organizer of this evening's talk. Thank you, libraries. Thanks also to partnering bookseller Red Balloon Bookshop. A purchase link to Drunk on Love will be available in the comments section of the live stream feed. Have it shipped, pick it up at their lovely store in St. Paul, or have them deliver it personally to your door if you're close to the area. Also, in the comments, you will see a survey link. Melsa would appreciate hearing what you think tonight of this club book program. Our guest tonight, rom-com queen Jasmine Guillory, burst onto the romance scene in 2018 with The Wedding Date, the first in her book series of the same name. Reese Witherspoon selected Guillory's follow-up, The Proposal, as the February 2019 read for Reese's book club. As Cosmopolitan declared, everything Jasmine Guillory touches turns to gold, and The Wedding Party is no exception. Her latest novel, Drunk on Love, is set in California wine country. This steamy story pairs Work to Live winery co-owner Margot with Luke, a Silicon Valley dropout who has just returned home to Napa. Booklist opines, suffused with tenderness and delight, this is Guillory's best book yet. So after some conversation between Jasmine and myself, we will have time for audience Q&A. So you can drop your questions in the comments thread here on Facebook, and our tech manager will route them to me. You can also send a message to Club Book through Facebook Messenger or email, where we're at clubbookmn@gmail.com. All right, now to dive into this conversation with you, Jasmine. I'm such a fan, so I was really excited when this opportunity arose to sit and talk with you. You've been so prolific, and I love your work. You graduated from Stanford Law School and worked in security and intellectual property law. So how do you get from this highly successful legal career to become a New York Times bestselling author?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me. And thank you, Emma, for agreeing to do this conversation. I'm delighted to talk to you and to hear from you all tonight. I think, it was a very kind of winding road to becoming a romance author. But I think there are a lot of authors, and particularly a lot of romance authors, who have history as a lawyer first. So I think that, maybe it's just that, at least I know for me, it's just that I felt the need to kind of use the other side of my brain in a way that I wasn't doing as a lawyer. I was missing doing something creative, learning something new, kind of doing something that wasn't already, that I could look up in a book, right, to figure out what I was doing, and to kind of, I've always kind of liked daydreaming and putting that in a fun place. And so I think that's where when I started writing, I think there are a lot of writers who start when they're real little, and I've always wanted to be a writer. I always wanted to be a lawyer. And then it was when I was a lawyer that I started writing because I kind of needed that creative outlet in my life. And so I started writing mostly kind of just to have a break, have kind of something else that I was doing outside of work that was fun. And then I just really loved it and kept going. And that's kind of basically how it started.
That's really cool. And I just appreciate how you allowed yourself to evolve, right? Like you started one place, and I think that's so common for us as humans. Like we just keep going. And I think like you really came into your own creatively. I mean, you have published 8 novels since 2018, which
Yeah.
is incredible. Congrats. That is epic. And Flirting Lessons, I saw, is going to be out in April of this coming year, 2025, which I will be checking out.
Thank you.
What is your writing process, and how are you so amazingly prolific?
Oh, thank you. My process is really, it's a little bit different from book to book. I think there are some things that stay the same. Like I always have somewhat of an outline, but the how detailed the outline is before I start writing really changes depending on the book. And things always change as I start writing. But I have kind of figured out that I need at least somewhat of a beginning, and then a middle, an idea of a middle, an idea of an end before I start writing, just so that I can keep pushing through like those hard parts. I know kind of where a direction that I'm going in. And for the past few books, and this really started, I wrote wrote 3 books during the pandemic. And the first book that I wrote, that I started writing in May of 2020, I wrote the entire first draft by hand, which I'd never done before, and mostly did as kind of a coping mechanism with the pandemic. Like it felt too difficult to say that I was writing a book at that time, right? Like pulling out my laptop and starting a Word document, like that felt impossible. So I was like, I'm just writing a little something in a notebook right now. Like that's all this is. It's just something in a notebook. And then eventually I realized, okay, fine, this is a book. I will start typing it up. But I think, whatever, sometimes it's like whatever you need to do to get started is that thing. Like I often actually, I think I almost always write the first like scene or first chapter by hand, because then you're not coming to a blank Word document. Like then I have something that I can start typing out, and then I just keep typing. And with this one, that was the idea, but then I couldn't. The idea of typing was like just felt too difficult, too big, And so I've done that with like some books since then. I haven't written the whole thing by hand, but I've written parts of it. And I think that helps kind of get over a hump sometimes, but I think those have been kind of the main constants in my writing process, in the past, I guess, 10 or so years.
That's great. And it seems like you've found ways to really take the pressure off. Like that's what I hear in even like sort of this, it almost as a therapist, I think about like cognitive tools and like, what do we do to help ourselves through something? And it's like so cool that you were like, I'm just gonna do a little casual
Yeah,
writing on my
writing.
notebook.
Yeah.
And like, what a great, refreshing way to approach that very challenging time for you to just, I don't know, let yourself off the hook a little bit and have some freedom and play with it. And then that turned out to have 3 books. I mean, in the pandemic's
Yeah.
entirety, which
Well,
is
the book I
awesome.
started, I was so, it was also, I mean, and that's also like partly why, for Flirting Lessons, my next book comes out in April. But I haven't had a book come out since Drunk on Love, which came out last, I guess not last year, the fall of 2022. And so, I took a bit of a break in between, which is the longest break I've taken since I started publishing. And partly that was because I wrote 3 books back to back to back
Yeah.
during the pandemic, and I just like my brain kind of turned off, and I realized like I need a little bit of a creative break. And luckily I have a very supportive publishing team, and so I could do that. But yeah, I mean, I think we all, there's like, I was putting a lot of pressure on me to just keep going, and at a certain point I could not keep going anymore.
Yeah.
I think that, that's definitely something that I think many people in creative fields have learned, is that you have to take time to refill the well, or else it dries out.
That's exactly right. And I'm curious about then what helped you get back to it? What was restorative? What helped you kind of recalibrate creatively to be able to then come back and continue to write?
I think a few things, partly just taking time, right? And partly just like adding other things. Like I got a puppy, who currently,
Yes.
by the way, I will say, is being very good, but she might start barking if any of her dog friends walk by the house, and just warning everyone out there. And I that made me like get outside every day and start walking her, and like learn a new neighborhood, and like all those kind of things. And I got to read a lot of books without, I've always loved reading. Like I've, been a big bookworm since I was a little girl. But there's a certain point when your career is writing and reading, that reading, there's parts of reading that feel like work. And so I could, I got to kind of read a lot of books without mostly thinking about it as work. And so that felt really good, to kind of bring that joy back, to the writing process and the reading process.
Yes, to bring the joy. I love that. And I think this is relatable to anyone who's been in anything creative, or maybe just being alive and feeling stuck, or feeling like you need to revitalize. And how do you do that? And it sounds like taking off, instead of having a singular focus on the writing, you kind of like got to experience some other things and take in and read and get back to it, which is lucky for us,
Yeah.
that you did. Um, so what drove you to contemporary romance as a genre?
It's funny. So when I first started writing, the first book that I wrote, which is never been published, is a was a young adult book. It was a young adult romance, but like the focus of the book wasn't the romance. The focus was like sort of a teenager coming of age and friendship and stuff. And I really loved writing that. And then, I kind of kept thought that I was going to keep going with it. But I was also reading a lot of romance. And when I started reading romance, I was reading a lot of historical romance, which I loved and still love. But I remember at one point thinking like, oh, this is so much fun to read, but I don't think I could write one of these. And then I started reading contemporary romance and was like, yeah, I want to write one of these. Like this seems fun. And so I think it just felt right. And then when I first, because the first romance I wrote was The Wedding Date. And when I first started writing it, it just felt it was so much fun. Like I had so much fun writing it. And it just felt right to me.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I think the genre is really, it's a powerful genre, because I think it like lets readers go into like their own longings, their own dreams, like who am I? What do I want? Like just, and also the element of escape and getting to see like these worlds unfold and all the characters. I've really come to the genre later in life and just like all in as a reader. So I really appreciate the work you
I
do.
mean,
And it
I'm
sounds
also
like
all in as a reader, so
yeah, great, great.
I'm right there with you.
Yes. So moving to your latest novel, Drunk on Love. It's a fast-paced read, and it's in idyllic wine country setting. How did you get the idea for this book?
A few different places. I mean, I live not too far away from wine country. I'm about an hour or so away. And it's a very kind of easy day trip. And especially, when during the pandemic, when a lot of things were closed, once things started reopening, wineries reopened pretty quickly,
Hmm.
because especially, in California, like it was easy to sit outside, right? And so I could go up there with friends and family, and we could go sit outside and drink wine and still kind of have some community when things were still feeling a little touch and go. And so, and I think I'd always had in the back of my mind, like, this would be a great place to set a book. And then I had, I was in the middle of actually still working on something else. And the idea for the first scene of this book came to me. Usually when that happens, I will just kind of like write down the idea and then move on with the thing that I'm supposed to be doing. And I'm like, I will get to that when it's time to get to that. And this time I was like, I just have to write this right now. So I just pulled out a new notebook and like wrote that scene down. And I was like, okay, I will start working on that book later. And then maybe a week later, the idea for another scene that's not, and I almost never write out of order. And the idea for another scene that was like a few, like, I don't know, a third of the way into the book came to me. So I just had to write that one down. And eventually I was like, I guess I'm just writing this book now. And so this book really, like, I had kind of the vague idea of there was going to be a woman who owned a winery with a member of her family and has romance. But then the characters just really came to me and I just kind of had to start working on it. And so that one was one where, like, I had the idea for these scenes and I was like, okay, let me figure out what else is happening before I really start writing it. And then I had to kind of sit down and figure that out and then dive right in.
The book found you.
Yeah.
Is what it sounds like. So do you remember where you were, like when you have a moment like that and it just hits you and you're like, oh, I know this scene, like I'm feeling this, like this is happening. Do you remember where you were when either of those scenes just kind of hit you?
I mean, the problem is, I'm sure I was back in my old apartment because that is where I spent the majority of my time
Yes.
in 2021 when I wrote this
Yep.
book. But yeah, I wrote a lot of the beginning of the book in wine country because a friend of mine has a house up there. And so I went up there like one weekend when she wasn't there to kind of really kind of start the beginning of the book, which felt really right to start it up there.
Yes. And I can tell, I mean, when you read the book, you get a real sense of place. It was clear you had spent time there. Like that, I'm not shocked that you don't live too far away and that you had spent this time there because you feel that in the book. And I think that's one of my favorite parts of the book is the way that that sense of place comes alive and how that affects the characters and how it made me really want to go to Napa Valley. Like absolutely. That's like, where is my winery? And maybe work in a winery. So you really brought that to life. It was clear you had been there. And so was there anything else that was really helpful to you in researching the book or considering, this particular novel?
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime you set something in a like kind of tourist place, there's certain things that like you experience as a tourist, right? But like I've never lived there. And so I wanted to talk to people who like live and work there, who this isn't their like vacation time. This is like their real life. And so I spent time like, somebody that I used to work with a really long time ago works at a winery now. And so I talked to her about like kind of her path there and what that's like and the ups and downs. And whenever I went to wineries, I think I started doing this kind of when I first started thinking that I was going to write a book set up there. Whenever I'd go, I kind of start talking to, whoever was working there, like, oh, how long have you been working here? What did you do before? How did you get this job? What do you like about, that kind of thing, to just kind of think of like, who are the kinds of people who come to do this kind of job? Where did they come from? What are the ups and downs? Who are the kind of people that they see all the time? Why did they come in the first place? And so that, just like spending time talking to people or and also like learning about kind of specifics about winemaking, right? And the patterns, because it's a very it's agriculture, right? It's a very seasonal work. And so figuring out like when are harvest is this time of year, what happens at other times of year, to kind of figure out what the patterns would be at a winery and for the winemaking.
Yes, right. Because there are so many details that
Yeah.
to enter that world, you need to know about the seasons and the timing and the year and when did you write, like all those pieces. And that
And
is clear that
there's so much research that you do as a writer that ends up like one sentence or a sentence that I end up cutting, right? Like I did a like ton of thinking about like, well, how many cases of wine would they produce and like this and that. And I ended up having, and then I was like, you know what? Nobody needs to know that but me. Like nobody's gonna care. I don't need to put this in the book. But sometimes that does kind of help me at some point in the process. But I think every writer has done that, like, has gone down the hole of like doing all this research and then it's like, actually, this does not actually need to be in the book.
right, right. It's almost like your inner Margot Noble.
Yes,
There, you were getting all the
right.
calculations, which
Yeah.
is the lead character.
Yeah.
She's very meticulous. She's really up on it. And in a way, you're channeling Margot Noble in that and really being on top of it. But I think that matters. I do think that backstory informs almost like the confidence too of just like, this world and we're entering the world with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So chapter 2 in Drunk on Love gets pretty spicy. What is it like to write a bedroom scene like that?
I think it's actually very much it's very much dependent on who the characters are and who they are in that moment in the book, right? Because like this point in Drunk on Love, Luke and Margot barely knew each other. They were each coming to this having their own weird days, that they came into this moment. And so I wanted to reflect that and sort of their each of their like kind of joy in throwing off like their, not even thinking about what was going on and what was happening in the rest of their lives and just living in the moment. But like that scene wouldn't have happened in the same way with two different characters or, 6 chapters into the book when they knew each other better. And so I think it really, you really have to think about like who these people are and like what is their relationship to each other and everyone else when for each one of those scenes. So it really does, like when I talked about like not writing out of order, I also really think like I needed to like, they barely knew each other and I only sort of knew them at the time, which I think worked for that scene. I mean, there's stuff obviously in revisions that I come back and add about each of them, but it really helps to kind of like learn about, they're learning about each other as I'm learning about who these characters are and how they react to one another.
That makes a lot of sense. Yes. And where they're at in their relationship. Like that.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
So there is so much pleasure in this book. There's the sex we were just talking about, but food and wine. And just like, it seems like it's a sensory book. It's just like so much there to savor. How do you decide what makes it in the book and what doesn't?
Well, what's funny is this, first of all, Drunk on Love is my longest book, but also the first draft of it was my longest first draft by far. There was a lot that I cut out of the book, to make this the not tight book that it is. And I think, some of it is, a lot of it for me in a first draft is throat clearing and figuring out, right, like talking about the kind of pleasure and the things that they enjoy in the book, like what of this works with these characters, right? And so I'm figuring out the characters, like what will they enjoy doing together? Who are their friends? When they go out to dinner with their friends, what are they eating and drinking, and like what else are they doing? What fun are they having? And so a lot of that is kind of like me learning about the characters and then telling you who the characters are through all of that. So it's really kind of narrowing down who they are as I keep writing and figuring that out and seeing what's, is this part important to the story?
You're making writing sound like so much fun. And I'm curious, like, how much of it for you, because you really do have this joyfulness as we're talking, and it's really great to just get to hear you in real time here, having this conversation with you and getting some of the inside scoop. But I'm wondering, like, how much of this is joy for you in terms of the writing process, and how much of it is just like hard work where you're like, I don't want to do it, or I'm pushing myself. Tell me about that.
Um, it depends on the day, right?
Uh,
Like there is, and I will say a lot of time getting to the writing is pushing myself. I don't want to do it. Why am I doing this? And then once I start, then I'm like, oh, okay, okay, this is good. But like at one point, I was just saying this because the note is still up in my office. At one point last year, I put up a note for myself that said, remember, you like writing. Because, and
yes.
I think because, like, as I was talking about earlier, like, once it becomes your job, it is sometimes, I do have to drag myself to my computer and like, oh, I have to do this today. But once I get into it, I do like it. And I have to just remind myself of that, is that to remember that I do have that joy in the actual writing, even though there's so much other stuff, kind of other noise out there.
That sounds really honest. I appreciate that. That just sounds really honest and human and real. Like there's the days where, but then once you start, you're in it. Um, so I'm really getting some questions on the live feed about your next book. And so people want to know, like I'm getting like a
All
bunch
right.
of stuff, like tell us about flirting lessons. So one question, um, and maybe we'll just open it with the basic question, which is what can you tell us about flirting lessons, which is your upcoming book?
Yeah, it comes out in April of 2025. And it is about two characters that are in Drunk on Love. Avery, who is Luke's best friend in this book, and Taylor, who works at the winery. And Avery has always been kind of very buttoned up, very together for everything. She has just had a breakup, and she's kind of ready to go out and do fun stuff and, flirt with people and make new friends. But the problem is she doesn't really know how to do any of those things. And Taylor is very good at all of that. And so Taylor teaches her how to do it and fall in love.
Yes. That sounds great. So what inspired you? Here's another question from the viewers tonight. What inspired you to write an LGBTQ plus romance story? And did you approach that project any differently than you have your past novels?
I'd actually always wanted to. I think it was just, sometimes it's just about finding the right characters. And then sometimes it's like I knew I already had the idea for Drunk on Love in my brain. And so I knew I had to write that one first. And then I knew, like, as I was writing Drunk on Love, I knew that this one was coming. And so, and it kind of really approaching it a different way. I don't really think so. I mean, I think it was fun. Like I had a lot of fun writing it. I think and at least I hope that all of my books I've kind of approached in the same way that I want this to feel like a fun like supportive relationship for people finding love with one another and both of them becoming better people in the process. So I
Mm.
hope I did that with Avery and Taylor, but I had a lot of fun writing this book and I really hope people love it.
That's such a great, succinct, almost like mission statement for your books that you just shared with us, that it's about people falling in love and also like I think was it finding the best in each other or bringing out the best in each other?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, I think that's sort of like the hope of love, right? Is to be able to do that. And that can look so many ways. So this book sounds awesome. I can't wait to check it out.
Well, I
As
hope
I
you love it.
know,
I certainly hope that I get to come to the Twin Cities as part of when the book comes out. But so let's all cross our fingers for that.
please do. Please come here. We would love to have you. That sounds excellent. Um, do you have a favorite passage of Drunk on Love? Is there anything that you would ever want to read? Um, and if you don't feel like reading today, I have many other questions we could do too.
Let me think on that while
Okay.
you, yeah, while
Okay.
we have
Sounds
it.
great. We can come back to that at any time if you feel like it, but we have many, many things to cover here. Um, so I have some other questions from viewers, and one question is, what was it like to be chosen for a major national book club like Reese Witherspoon's, and what did it require of you?
I mean, I don't even think it was really amazing. I think I didn't when I got the phone call, like my editor told me to sit down and I was like, why? And it is, I think the best part about it really is that Reese and the Reese's Book Club do such a great job supporting authors, not just for that book, which they do a really great job for the book itself, but for the whole career. I mean, I've done events with Reese's Book Club ever since 2019. Like I've done, Zoom book clubs and in-person events, and they've really been supportive of like every book of mine since then and bringing authors together. And I've really like met a bunch of other recent book club authors through that. In a few weeks, she's doing her Shine Away, which is it was the first one was last year, and it's kind of a big gathering of people who've had events or had other things happen through Hello Sunshine, and all of the Reese's Book Club authors were invited, so I'm going to go to that, and it's been just a really wonderful experience, and has certainly brought me so many more readers, both in the moment for the proposal, but kind of throughout the time as they help promote other books of mine. And so it's really been wonderful to kind of meet so many other authors and so many readers through it. For me, I went down to LA shortly before the announcement, and we kind of filmed some stuff for it, but that was really the biggest thing that it required of me. I mean, I think they do a very good job of like kind of figuring out exactly how to promote their books, and but yeah, I mean, it was really wonderful.
What was it like meeting Reese?
Oh, it's so funny because she looks exactly like you would expect her to look, which is seems like a weird thing to say, right? But but and is really just like a big book nerd. Like she, I met her the last time was last, I guess it was in 20, yeah, it was a year ago, a little over a year ago, when she does the Reese's Book Club also does this lit up fellowship where they, the goal is really to get more writers of like underrepresented writers into publishing and kind of give them information about publishing and mentor, they pair them with a mentor. And so I was a mentor for the one in 2023. And so we all like had a week long or like 5-day long retreat, and Reese came for one part of it. And she was just so excited to talk to all the writers and, talk about everybody's books. And it's always, really exciting to see like these, I mean, I think, Reese and Jenna and Oprah, like who do these book clubs, they're just like people who really love books. And it's very exciting to have like nerdy book people have the like prominence to talk about books to a whole lot of people. It's great.
Yes, yes. it helps everyone. I mean, I
Yeah,
think you're
exactly. Yeah.
absolutely right that like that passion for books and they can like bring it forward and really like get more people excited about reading, which promotes empathy and does all kinds of great things for humanity. So that
Yeah,
is
exactly.
really cool that you have stayed connected too, not just, to be a part of the book club in 2019, but then also to continue this relationship with it. That's really exciting to hear about as
Yeah.
well.
It's funny because when I went to China Way last year, I met Curtis Sittenfeld, who's near you.
Yes.
And she, it was funny because she described Reese as just a real nerd in the body of a cheerleader, which I think is totally, yeah.
And in our world, I feel like a real nerd is the highest
Yes.
compliment. Like when we
Yeah,
say
yeah.
a real nerd, we mean like top shelf
Yes,
person.
exactly, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's as good as it gets.
Uh,
So another question came in about, so what can you share about the Peacock adaptation of the book?
Yeah, so the writers attached are Attica and Tembi Locke, who are both phenomenal. Attica, I mean, they're both phenomenal writers in their own right. Like Attica has written a number of mystery thriller novels. And Tembi is she wrote a memoir. Um, called From Scratch. That's a beautiful book. And then together, I mean, I don't know what was in the water in this family. Like they're sisters, and together they wrote and produced Tembi's memoir From Scratch when it was on Netflix, and have done TV writing together and other stuff. And so as soon as they told me that those two were attached, and they're both amazing, like I've met them both, they're both incredible. And as soon as they told me those two were attached, I was like, I have nothing to worry about. It's great. I love it. And so I saw Tembi actually for at a Reese Book Club event a few months ago, and she told me a little bit about kind of the writing process and stuff. So hopefully I'll get to read a script soon. I know they're very excited about it, and so let's all keep our fingers crossed because yeah.
Do you know when it's going to come out?
I mean, everything about Hollywood is a huge mystery, so nobody
Yes.
knows anything.
Yes.
I am always the last person to know, but I don't think nobody knows anything yet. So let's all hope.
Let's all hope.
Yeah.
Yes. Great. Is there any subject that you are hungering to research in support of a future project or for personal enjoyment? And this was another viewer question.
Oh, let's see. I mean, I think there are a ton of things. Like every time I get a little bit interested in something, I start thinking like, could this be a fun book thing? And like, especially whenever I travel somewhere, I start thinking about, could I set a book here? What would happen? Who would be the people in each book? So I think sometimes that's more location than anything else. I would maybe love to set a book in New Orleans someday because that's such a fun and interesting city. There's so much background there. But I feel like I would have to really get to know the city a lot better in order to do that. And then, there's like just some beautiful tropical locations that would be amazing to set books in, but I think that's just more for my own joy. I'm like, I would set a book in Hawaii anytime. But again, like I would have to kind of know, because just like setting one in Napa, right? Like you would have to know what it was like to live there and not just be on vacation, which is not something that I know. And so I think though, kind of those things, like really understanding a location and the people in the location. But so far, almost all of my books for one have been set in California, which is because it is the place that I know best. But even like I don't a number of my books have been set in LA. I don't know LA that well, but I go to LA and I also talk to a lot of people who live there to kind of ask a lot of questions about what it is to live there and like location and all of that stuff. By the book was set in Santa Barbara, which I wrote the bulk of it during the pandemic, and then when we couldn't travel, and then when we could travel again, I went there with a friend, and we just drove around a bunch so I could figure out like where things would be, because I was like, what, because they spend most of their time in this one house. And I was like, where's the house? Like I need to know where I put it. So we were driving all around in the in the hills, like where all the expensive houses are. I'm like recording out my through my phone out the window. I was like, someone is going to call the police at any minute. Like, why is this woman doing this? But it was really helpful to like go back to that and think, and like go back to that and compare it to Google Maps and think about where everything would be. So it's that kind of research that I like have a lot of fun doing. Some of it just the on the ground stuff and really, talking to people and figuring out locations and all of that.
Yeah, it sounds like you're not afraid to really dive in to a place, and also that you have some really good friends, like some really
Yeah.
great, like game friends who are up for
Yeah.
travel and exploration and research. It sounds like
Well,
very fun.
also it's much easier to kind of like to not exactly make a fool of yourself but to like do something that you wouldn't necessarily do when if someone looks at you funny. You could be like, oh, it's for a book, it's for a book.
Yes.
One of my friends was talking about, she's in the midst of writing, this is actually the friend I went to Santa Barbara with. She's in the midst of writing a book right now where one of the main characters like has a really fancy car, and she was like, how do I like test drive a fancy car? Like, just so I know what it's like to drive it. I might have to like rent one for a day, because like this is like what writers are always thinking, like I have to put myself in that, but how do I do that? I was like, I would come, pretend I was gonna buy a fancy car with you. Like,
Yes, right. All in the name of research.
yeah,
Like you
exactly.
have to drive a Bentley,
Yeah,
right? Like
exactly.
you just
Yeah,
have to.
what are you gonna do? Yeah,
That's excellent. Like
yeah,
really diving into those
yeah.
experiences. So I have another question from the audience. Your books really show what romantic joy can look like within the BIPOC community. It's refreshing and heartwarming. They have come at a time when the publishing community is making changes to highlight more Black authors and stories. Tell us about what that means for you.
I mean, just for me personally, it has meant that I like as a reader, I've gotten to read so many great books. Like, as when I was a kid growing up, I didn't get to read a lot of books about people who looks like me. And now I have a lot more, both like for romance novels to read, but also all sorts of different books. I go like to buy books for little kids for their birthdays, and I can find lots of books that look like those little kids, and it delights me that I can do that in a time when I couldn't for myself when I was little. And so that makes me really happy. And I think for as a writer, I'm thrilled that there's so many other writers out there who I can have as colleagues and can talk to about what's going on, and also like to make sure it keeps happening, right? To like put the pressure on publishing to show like when even just talking about like not just the publishing part, but like getting the support for the authors, getting people to go on book tours, sending people to book festivals, like all of that stuff. You can show like, look at all of these people who came to these romance events, like you should send these other writers on book tour too, people will come. And I think like partly that is like you start that when you like make the push and say like, I'm going to do this by myself, and then see how it works. And if it works, then publishing will say like, oh, that could have been a fluke, maybe that was a fluke, and then you just sort of keep showing it. And I think that's one thing that I really hope keeps happening, is that we keep getting books like this and we keep seeing the support for writers of all different kinds, in different genres, at different age levels, who are writing about all different kinds of people. And so I really hope it keeps going.
Me too. Tell us, are there any authors you would recommend? Let's say someone's devoured, all of your work right now. They're awaiting your next flirting lessons. In the meantime, what should they check out?
All righty, I've got some. Alexa Martin, I love all of her books. If you are loving football season right now, or even if you don't, I love all of her. She's sort of a football themed set of romances that are set in and around a football team, but also a number of other books too, and they're all great. Kennedy Ryan, her books are incredible, very like emotional, with like lots of different feelings. Her so well written. I love her books. Let's see, what I just finished a book. Oh, Elise Bryant. Her most recent one, It's Elementary, was a mystery with like there's some romance in there. Sorry, Rosie, it's okay. I loved her book that just came out. Let's see, Anita Kelly, her books are amazing. Yeah, I could keep going on, but that's a handful.
That is great. Thank you for sharing those. And I was writing them down because
Okay,
it's
good.
just excellent to get that from your perspective. So thank you. Another audience question. I've heard through book clubs that you are a NaNoWriMo success story. So, and for those who don't know what that is, it's National Writing Month, which is the month of November, where people try to churn out a manuscript during that month. So that's like a movement that some people join into. So is this true, or is this rumor that you started that way?
It is. So the goal is really to write 50,000 words in a month. And that's how I started the wedding date. And so I wrote, they have a few different months. I did it in April. It's kind of most of the power goes to November, but I started the wedding date on April 1st, and wrote the first 50,000 words that month. And then like kept going, not quite as fast, and then finished that manuscript. And one of the things I think, not everybody can work that way, and it doesn't work for everybody, but one of the things that helped me with was kind of taking away my inner editor, and just getting myself to like get a draft down on the page, because like, there's so many times where you're like, oh, that scene didn't work, I'll go back and fix it and stuff, and that's all well and good, but for me it's best if I like get to the end and then I can go back and like do all of the editing I want. But and everybody writes differently, so if that process doesn't work for you, don't feel like I will never be a writer, because I know lots of people who it doesn't work for. For me, it's just very helpful to set myself on a schedule and then just keep going until I get to the end of a draft. And then I usually have like a kind of massive, unwieldy, very poorly written draft that I can go back and do lots of edits to, which is very helpful for me. But yeah.
So you are more of a get it out there, sounds like, writer, and then you go back and edit. When you said like put myself on a schedule, would you be willing to share like what is a typical writing day for you? Do you have a typical writing process?
So it really depends for every book. I often have tried to Jamie Attenberg, who actually is another incredible writer and who has a book that just came out today, actually, called A Reason to See You Again. Her last book was called 1,000 Words a Day, and it's basically a book about writing, more or less, and it started from, she has a newsletter where she'll do kind of like 2 weeks of intense writing 1,000 words a day. And we'll get like guest, writers to write essays for, and that book came out of there. And so there's a lot of great advice in it. I recommend that book to kind of anyone who thinks that they might want to write. What I wrote a small essays for it, but there's so many great writers who wrote essays for it. But I have often kind of tried to get about 1,000 words a day when I'm working on a draft. But honestly, for me, sometimes it's just more working on it a little bit every day. Just helps me keep the story in my head and like keep the characters in my head, so that even if I've only written a little bit, I'm still thinking about the story all day, and I'll have an idea like, oh, this is how I can fix that thing. Whereas like I have lots of friends who like won't write for a week and then will write 6,000 words on one Sunday. That has never worked for me, but it like works for, kind of brains work in different ways. But for me, just kind of keeping up a little bit of steady writing, even if it's like just a page or something a day, really helps, because it just kind of keeps that creative juices flowing a little bit.
Does that include weekends for you?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I know plenty of writers who like set their schedules so that they don't write on weekends. I just always like, I just keep going. And when I start a first draft, I just keep going until I stop. And then I'll give myself a weekend off. But but yeah.
Yeah, and that works for you. And I think you're absolutely right that different people there's as many processes as there are writers, but I still think it's fascinating to hear like what has worked for you, because clearly it's really worked. So I'm interested in that. I think a lot of other people are too. So I think we have time for just maybe like one or two more questions here before we end. Um, so one person asked from the audience, your book covers really pop. So here's an example of one, like just like a vivid pop image here. Does an author have any say in the cover art creation or selection? And do you? Because my guess is this varies.
Yeah, it varies. I think most people that I know have had, it's a real conversation between you and the publishing team. Because I think the goal is like your publisher wants you to love the cover, right? And so, so for the most part, I mean, I give all the credit to the incredible art department at my publishers, because they've done an incredible job, both in kind of translating, because usually what happens is, in the early stages, I'll have a conversation with my editor about kind of what I like for the cover, what I'm envisioning. And it also depends on when it is, right? And because for my first few books, like my draft was already in, my editor had already read the book. So there were things that she could tell the cover designer. But depending on the schedule, there have been times when they need to start working on the cover before I have turned in the book. So I'll have to like talk to my editor about like, okay, this is what happened, this is the backstory, these are the things, but I remember like when I had the conversation about the proposal, it was like, like LA, like palm trees and the sun and sunglasses, and then they translate it into something great. And so then like I'll get a draft and we'll usually go back and forth a little bit, but I will say with the cover of Drunk on Love, there was so little back and forth on this. I mean, I think the only real decision was like one of the mock-ups had like the cover was pink and the shoes were orange, and it was like deciding which one. I mean, that was basically it, because I loved this immediately. And so it was really like tiny changes that we made throughout. So yeah, they've done a really incredible job.
Definitely. And that's great that you had that synergy where it really, that's such a detail, right? Just
Yeah.
the color, the color of the
Yeah.
shoe or the color to feel like there's that synergy together is awesome creatively. So is there anything tonight that we didn't get to, Jasmine, that you really wanted to make sure to talk about, or did we cover it?
I think we covered everything. It was so great to talk to you. I do have to do one little shout out to one of my best friends who is there in the audience, Simi Pitnike. Thank you for coming.
That is so great. It's always so good to have friends show up
Yes.
and be a part of it. And
I've
uh,
come to the Twin Cities a number of times to visit because of her. So
yes, and I hope that you do come back
I hope
again
so too. Yes, it probably won't be in
very
the winter. You
soon.
know, I'm a soft Californian, so I will warn you on that.
Okay,
But
so we may not see you till the
yeah,
spring,
yeah.
perhaps. It's fair. I understand this. I actually went to school in California. I know I could see why anyone might want to stay out there. But there are many wonderful things to be had here too. So I hope that we get to see you again soon.
I hope so too.
It's
Yeah.
been an absolute delight to get to
Yeah, this has
talk
been
with
a
you.
joy. Thank
I
you so
really,
much.
yeah, just thank you for bringing a lot of insight. And I think just I felt like we got to learn more about who you are and your creative process, and that's really exciting to get the inner scoop on that. Um,
Well,
and
I love
yeah,
libraries. You know, so many of my formative memories as a kid growing up who loved to read were in libraries. And so I always have a great time when I'm having conversation with people in the library. So thank you so much for having me, and thank you for this great conversation. I really appreciate it.
great. Yes, this has been a presentation of Club Book, which is a long-running literary series of Melsa made possible by the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Special thanks to Carver County Library for bringing Jasmine to us. And please look for the Club Book survey link, which is in the comments and will be projected in place of my video right now. Consider joining Club Book on Monday, September 30th for their next program featuring chart-topping mystery writer Matt Goldman, author most recently of Still Waters. Learn more at clubbook.org. Have a great night, everyone. Thanks so much for being here.